The Newsagents.
Tuesday is high noon for Rishi Sunak, the single most perilous day of his premiership. By the time you're listening to this, the results of the vote on the second reading of his emergency Rwanda legislation may be in, then maybe not. The vote may have been deferred. Either way, there is no good outcome for Sunak. He has marched his troops up to the top of the hill. It has been clear many of them had no wish to go with him. Today is one of those days in Westminster where developments are second by second, where every tweet is dangerous, where events turn on a moment. On this show, we're going to take a step back a little bit, take a breath, expand our view, and ask a question. How could it have been that Rishi Sunak could have got himself into this mess, that his premiership, at the very least his authority, could hang by a thread on the basis of a policy which probably won't even work? It's Lewis here. Welcome to the Newsagents.
From Global's newsroom at 1 o'clock, an asylum seeker has suddenly died on board the Bibi Stockholm barge in Dorset.
Inevitably, all eyes today will be on Westminster's shadowy corridors. But perhaps they should have been on the Isle of Portland, on that narrow stretch of water off the Dorset coast. The Bibi Stockholm barge, another favourite of the government spin doctors, plastered so often on the front pages, the home of 500 asylum seekers, has one less name on its ledger than it did yesterday. An asylum seeker taking their own life in circumstances which are at the time of recording unclear. It is a reminder that whatever their origins, whatever their legitimacy or otherwise as a refugee or not, whatever their reasons for being here, everyone has a story, each with a beginning and an end, a person, a living complexity. Ever since that awful day in November 2021, where 27 people, including children, died, Westminster's line on the small boats has in fact hardened. And by the time Sunak steps onto the stage in his own right, all the complexity had disappeared. One of our problems is that so often our debate is anything but complex.
We will pass new laws to stop small boats.
This Conservative Prime Minister will act now to stop the boats.
We've introduced tough new measures today to help us stop the boats.
It is vital, literally vital, that we end the illegal crossings in the Channel.
We will be able to grip this problem. We are doing it all because when I said at the beginning of the year that we would stop the boats, I meant it.
Having a front page of the Telegraph with a plane taking off to Rwanda, that's my dream.
Sunak's own solution. He would not just reduce the crossings, not just reduce the backlog of those already here, not return a certain number. He would stop them. Full stop. It was a pledge painted in primary colours, delivered ad nauseam. Westminster, for its part, said it was clever, that even if he couldn't do it, he could run against the institutions who stopped him, the court specifically. As ever with Westminster, it was too clever by half. In constantly repeating something that proved impossible, he only advertised his impotence. Boris Johnson, through sheer elan, might have got away with it, but Sunak isn't so supple. It's proven a profound miscalculation. Sunak has managed to make the Tory party, which actually agrees on the ends to stop the crossings, to have a fundamental disagreement about the means. Here's former Deputy Prime Minister Terz Coffee on LBC this morning.
Very straightforwardly, I'll be supporting the bill tonight, and I'm conscious there's a lot of my colleagues don't think the legislation is perfect at both ends of the, if you like, the political spectrum of the party. But my view strongly is that if we don't put this bill forward, there won't be another bill.
And it is, of course, manna from heaven for Labour, who themselves managed to avoid awkward questions on immigration and its policy through sheer Tory psychosis. Here's Keir Starmer on LBC this morning.
Firstly, the circus is back in town in Westminster with the Labour Party in this sort of self-indulgent vortex of nothingness, where they're sort of dragged towards, woke, wedge, where can we find divides? They've got into that political space. Meanwhile, we're just a few weeks from Christmas. We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Many families won't have the Christmas they want because they can't afford it. The NHS has got 7.7 million people on the waiting list and rising. And next year, 2024, as we turn into it, 2.3 million mortgage holders who are on fixed mortgages will be paying hundreds of pounds more per month because of the damage that the Tories have done to the economy. So there's a sort of reality gap between the real world and the Tories' self-indulgent grandstanding and star chambers, all about positioning themselves for the future and having a fight amongst themselves. and what's going on for millions of people across the country.
Though Sunak, perhaps they're not only the one having a bad day, we think Starmer meant the Conservative Party, but no matter. Whichever way Sunak turns now, he can only really lose. If he defers the vote, it's clear he has no authority. This is the only piece of legislation which matters for the rest of this Parliament. If he loses, that could be it. If he clears the vote, but only narrowly, it is a crisis deferred, not diffused. When the bill comes back for committee stage, it will be amended to bits. And the government has been clear, it's basically unamendable. Tighten it up further, it risks breaking international law, and Rwanda pulls its support for the scheme. Loosen it, as the One Nation group of more left-wing Conservative MPs might want, and Downing Street says it'll be too open to challenge. In the middle, number 10, arguing to every side that they each win something, that theirs is the Goldilocks solution. Is it Rishi Sunak in that prime ministerial chair? Or Theresa May? To close your eyes right now is to imagine you might be in 2019 again, something few of us might have ever hoped for. The airwaves dominated by talk of star chambers, of deferred votes, ministers flying back from conferences to vote, of a premiership lived day by day, hour by hour. In acting in the way that he has, by placing such store on this piece of legislation, Rishi Sunak has unwittingly reanimated the Brexit wars. Perhaps they never really went away. The taste of that sort of politics stayed with the Conservative Party, and the Tory right in particular. Peter Foster is the public policy editor of the Financial Times, and he followed those fateful Brexit votes very closely.
I think it's really important to understand quite how structural the problems that Brexit created are. They can't be wished away. So if you go right back to Boris Johnson, remember Boris Johnson saying F business. Why did Boris Johnson say F business? It was because ultimately people had gone to him and come up with lots of complicated reasons why leaving and erecting trade barriers to our largest market was going to cause lots of problems. And what was the response to that? Not to engage in solving a complex problem. It was F business, go away. And you've seen that repeated all the way through the Brexit process. It then became F the civil service, and it became F Parliament when they prorogued Parliament because things got too complicated. And then it became F our international legal and treaty obligations when they found that the Northern Ireland Protocol that they'd negotiated didn't work to their satisfaction. And now it becomes F our international treaty obligations as regards human rights and the ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, because it doesn't suit their Rwanda plan. We're not going to leave the ECHR. We'd end up joining a club with, Russia and Belarus. The ECHR underpins the Good Friday Agreement. The ECHR underpins all of the security chapters of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the agreements on data sharing and police cooperation. And, this is the problem. And by the way, sensible people know perfectly well that we're not going to be leaving the ECHR. All of these things are a piece. If your response to complicated questions is essentially F off, I don't care, then you end up in a place where we've ended up now. And that's why I don't think it's a coincidence that whoever it is, whether it's Rishi Sunak or Theresa May or Boris Johnson, they all end up in the same place, which is the revolution eats its children. It becomes the function of this way of processing problems just leads you into a cul-de-sac, which is where Rishi Sunak finds himself now. I mean, the irony about this is that they're doing this because they think it's going to save the Tory party. It's going to save them at the next election. That seems to be the rationale that you hear from Suella Braverman or Bill Cash or the right wing of the Tory party. But last time I checked the polls, the Conservative Party were heading for a massive defeat. They're 23 points behind in the polls. The bonkers thing about all of this is that the thing that they've hitched their wagon to, stop the boats, is the thing that they were never going to be able to do. I mean, I'd love to have been in the room when they decided, what's our strategy, chaps? Oh, we're going to stop the boats. Every minister that comes out is going to say, we're going to stop the boats. Well, can you stop the boats? Oh, well, no, not really. Well, is that a good idea to make that our number one top tip strategy? No.
It's an issue where cooperation with Europe is at its core, which has our legal order at its core, and it was always going to be pitch perfect to reanimate those divides. It was therefore foolish of Sunak to open that Pandora's box. And in that box, trapped deep inside the modern Tory soul, is basically the same argument that we had again and again and again for all of those years about sovereignty. What does it mean to be sovereign? Can it be shared? Is it absolute?
There is a terrible sense of déjà vu, isn't there? A flashback to those periods where you had this coterie of sovereignty-obsessed, I think it's fair to say, right-wingers led by Bill Cash, convening the Starr chamber to adjudicate on first Theresa May's Brexit deal and then the deal on Northern Ireland. The similarity at the heart of all this is about parliamentary sovereignty. It's about the belief of this group of Tories that parliamentary sovereignty trumps everything, including our international obligations. And of course it doesn't, because, as Rishi Sunak pointed out, the Rwandans don't want and won't agree to a deal that rips up our obligations under the European Convention of Human Rights, under the UN treaties on asylum and immigration. But the sovereigntist, the Starr chamber, is back saying, essentially, we don't care. We want what they would describe as a watertight piece of legislation, which wouldn't work anyway. You just go round in a circle. And we saw this with Northern Ireland. Brexit was about creating borders. So when Brexit, the very hard Brexit that they demanded, created a border in the Irish Sea, they essentially demanded that there wasn't a border. And then they demanded the British government legislate to refuse to accept the border that it had already agreed. And so we just go round and round in circles. It's more about the Tory party managing its own dynamics than it is talking to itself, than it is about coming up with operable solutions that are going to fix the problem. It's just endless examples of where, sovereignty is a fungible commodity. It's not an absolute commodity. We trade it all the time. We trade it in negotiations over climate change, over security, etc. And, this sort of, without being flippant, sort of Dad's Army view of foreign affairs, Dad's Army view of Great Britain, just makes us look simplistic. And I think we've just backed ourselves into a cul-de-sac where we've told ourselves or told a load of people that somehow to make Britain great, we need to kind of go off and constantly do our own thing rather than engage with our neighbourhood and with our partners.
It didn't need to be this way. There was another story Sunak could have told. He could have focused on a slowly recovering economy. He could have focused on legal migration. He could have focused on the falling numbers coming across legally, partly, he would say, thanks to him. Instead, he promised the undeliverable, to stop them all. He chose to focus on the question where he was most exposed on his right flank, where Richard Tice and Nigel Farage circle like vultures. And though the public is concerned about small boats, they are concerned about immigration, it is a more nuanced picture than the way Westminster often presents. Here's Luke Trill, a former Conservative special advisor and pollster for More in Common.
I think the mistake that the government have made is to confuse the public's very strong desire to reduce both legal and illegal migration with support for the Rwanda bill. When you dig into the polling on Rwanda, what you tend to find is that, yes, more people are in favour than opposed to the policy, but it never reaches a majority. And so there are lots of question marks over whether the Rwanda policy itself is the right one. And that's why you get that kind of lukewarm level of support from the public. In fact, what's interesting is when you ask people a follow-up question, do you think the Rwanda policy will work? Actually, people are much more likely to say they don't think it will reduce numbers of channel crossings than say that it will. And what's also interesting is when you test other ways of tackling illegal immigration, so for instance, cracking down on people smugglers, doing deals with the French. In fact, Keir Starmer's proposal to treat people smugglers like terrorists, they're actually much more popular than the Rwanda policy. So the government has somehow got itself into this bind of thinking that the Rwanda policy itself, rather than the desire to tackle channel crossings, is what the public really want. There is a very clear split on the salience of immigration as an issue. And what you tend to find is that blue wall voters, we call them established liberals, tend to place a slightly higher premium on it. And they tend to as well be quite uncomfortable with things like the Rwanda policy and certainly the idea of something like leaving the European Court of Human Rights in order to achieve it. On the other side of the Conservative coalition, Red Wall voters, that group who gave Boris Johnson his majority in 2019, flipped from Labour to the Conservatives for the first time, much more socially conservative. And they are driven largely by two things. One is, this real sense of fair play and the desire to follow the rules. But they also have much higher threat perception than the average voter. And that leads them to things like they want to be very tough on crime. It's why they want to be tough on something like illegal migration. And so for this group, tackling illegal immigration really does matter. But again, what I think the government get wrong is, yes, this group will say we should try the Rwanda policy, but they are very sceptical that it will work. And I think the particular mistake the government has made is saying that they will stop the crossings entirely, that there will be zero crossing, because the public are incredibly cynical about the idea of zero. It just doesn't sit with them that there will never be crossing. Instead, what the government should have done today is champion things like the Albania deal. When you talk to red wall focus groups about something like the Albania deal, what you find is actually people go, oh, there's something that's worked. It has actually reduced things, but they don't know about it because the government never talks about its successes. Instead, it's made this sort of obsession with zero crossings the be and the end all. And quite rightly, based on the track record to date, voters, and particularly the voters they're trying to target with this policy, are just incredibly sceptical that that will work.
We should always remember we are not alone in having these conversations. European politics is gripped by the migration crisis. The French immigration minister has just resigned over their equivalent of a migration bill. Other countries are exploring options such as the Rwanda scheme, though the British experience may prove salutary. But for Sunak, has the effort been worth the cost? Remember, we are only talking here about a tiny percentage of our overall migration numbers. Sunak would rather talk about these people because he's actively allowed the rest to come in. It's too awkward to talk about. And even with the small boat arrivals, all we're talking about here is a prospect of a handful of people being sent to Rwanda before the election, if it happens at all. Their argument is that it would be a political win and would be a deterrent to others. But as we've reported on the newsagents for months and months and months, that is far from a given. All of Westminster talks as if there is a deterrent effect for Rwanda, but there is little to no evidence for it. I've spoken to people in the camps who literally laugh at the idea. And listen to this. This is Matthew Rycroft, the permanent secretary of the Home Office, the top civil servant official in that department, at a parliamentary hearing yesterday, asked whether there is any evidence that Rwanda is a deterrent.
We do not have the evidence that there is a deterrent effect for Rwanda yet, and I think it would be surprising if we did, given that it is not yet operational. But as and when it is operational, it will be possible to make a judgment about, first of all, how many fewer people are there crossing the channel in small boats, and of that reduction, how much of that is down to the Rwanda policy as opposed to the other parts of the government's response to the challenge.
So, the most senior Home Office official reminding us that £290 million could be spent on something which might never happen, for which even the Home Office itself is not certain will be any deterrent. And all those people can, of course, leave Rwanda and try and come back to the UK. This is the one other way in which this whole saga reminds me of Brexit. Back then there were so many so-called unicorns. It was too often impossible to talk about trade-offs, to have a grounded debate about the reality of the situation without being labelled as a Ramona or whatever, where the echo chamber between the Conservative papers and Downing Street and politicians went round and around and around and only sometimes graced reality. This is a bit like that. Prime Ministers have for a long time alighted on short-term tactics, day by day, headline by headline, in expense of a long-term strategy. Cameron did it. May did it. Sunak is doing it. It may well end him, as it did them. When we come back, we bring to life exactly what we've been talking about. Stay with us. Now, we're going to return to that question of whether or not Rwanda is a deterrent. You may remember back in September, I spent some time in northern France, again reporting from the camps, as I've done many times before. This was for a special News Agents Investigate episodes. Given what we found there was so germane to today, we thought we'd revisit it. Here's an extended sequence from that episode in which we spoke directly to a people smuggler. The News Agents has worked with an undercover team to try and set up a meeting with a smuggler for many months. They are shadowy figures in the makeshift camps which surround Pas de Calais. But eventually, one did agree to meet with us.
Walaikum salam, brother. My name is Ahmed. Ahmed, nice to meet you.
A Kurdish man, part of the Kurdish mafia, who operate these routes and in these parts.
But we need help from France to UK.
Yeah. That I make this.
Very
this
good.
Is my work.
Money was the first thing on his mind.
I have the game.
Yeah.
He make like he bring people for this price. You understand?
Okay.
So
how much?
I take for you 1,500.
In pounds?
Pounds.
Okay,
yes.
And I give to your cousin in
1,500 pounds.
And then he took us through the process of what happens once an asylum seeker arrives, talking him through it step by step.
You will take the boat to Dover?
Yes.
Okay, what happened when he arrived?
I say you, when boat going to England Channel, in the police wait you.
Police is waiting?
But security friends police is wait you.
Yeah.
بوليس يمشي مع الناس
بوليس بوت فرانس ميليتري you go to garden ship اسمه البوت he help after you go to England finish.
This is very safe in work.
So the
I say, promise me, I have people from Georgia, Albania, they buy me 4,000 pounds, 3,000 pounds.
Very good.
You know, but you are good man, why I give you this money for?
When the boat arrive, the police will help bring to the Dover, yes?
Dover, yes.
Then what happened when he get off the boat?
He go to there, he make the asile. He give asile, normal, he go to hotel for Starr.
Yes.
Question, next interview is big.
Yeah.
You have to be ready.
Okay.
You have to make
I understand. We have to
good
make
case. Politica, humanity.
Yeah.
But politica is good. Because politica, they cannot bring you back to your country never.
I understand,
But humanity...
The problem is he's from India. He's coming from...
I can't say I have a problem with the Bombay Mafia.
With the mafia?
Bombay Mafia.
Okay, I understand then. So after when they do the big case, he has to make a story. Why?
Yes.
So we can say Bombay Mafia. We say something like this. For him to get the asylum is
why
this.
not? You make some paper in your country. Say I have problem with this mafia. They wanna kill me, my family.
And when can I take my cousin from the hotel?
After 1 week, he's in hotel. You can't. He can't give your address. He come to your address.
He can come. Perfect.
Last week I sent Albanian people. And one of my friend Albanian live in London. Okay. He say after 1 week you can save by email. Says my cousin he have to live by me. I saved him. Okay. After he can come to you.
And our smuggler is very well aware of Brexit and how he says that makes his life easier.
They have to do the fingerprint.
Look, now England is without European, you know. You have finger from Bulgaria, Serbia, here it's not problem.
And then
because England is without Europa, he's out
in European.
I understand.
This is very good.
It's been successful, your trips.
Yes.
The boat rides.
The boat ride, everything.
Okay, good. Because he's very worried.
No,
my cousin.
Say him, don't worry.
One thing.
Look,
we get worried about water.
See, look, I sent familia with children like 1 year.
Look, this is one woman.
How many?
1 year, children. 1 year, baby.
Thank you, brother.
Have a nice day, inshallah.
You too, brother. It's good weather. It's good.
Anything, any cousin, any people want.
Maybe he will have some other people. I'll ask him.
It's mafia. It's business.
He is mafia, this guy.
Business money. Accident, one boat maybe 100,000 one boat money.
He make 100,000. Wow.
These people aren't afraid of the authorities. They're part of a sophisticated network across Europe and the Middle East. They are excellent salesmen and they will say whatever it takes, are as indifferent to life as it gets. But you've got to remember that for the people here who've made long journeys, they might not like the smugglers, but they perform a service they want.
The UK no dangerous, no problem.
So you think it's dangerous here already?
Yeah, it's dangerous. I'm go to 3-4 times going, police is a problem now, coming now, catch now, go back jungle. As 5-6 times I'm trying now.
But it's dangerous on the water, isn't it? You might...
No dangerous, I'm check the waves, so no problem.
No problem?
No problem. If weather is a no good time, not go. Weather is a good time, go now.
But the boats are very crowded.
No, boat is best, no problem, no any danger problem. I have safe jackets and better 50 people and go now.
But people have died. People have died.
No problem. Any people, no jacket have no jacket is a die. It's no money, it's no jacket.
Your screen is saying it's a lawless country in Iraq, and yours says it's only good for the sons of the officials. So it's corrupt. It is corrupt.
Yes. No money. No clothes. In Iraq.
Your favourite place is London? Your favourite place? Why? Because they're good people, they keep the law. Because where you feel human, the people are good. So you trust English people, British people. They're good people.
English people.
Yeah.
Is it safe in London?
Safe.
Just this 15 people going to the boat is not dangerous. Yeah.
And have you heard about Rwanda? About Britain sending people like you to Rwanda? Rwanda, have you heard about that?
No, I don't know.
You never heard about that?
I don't have.
Because, you know, the British government...
To the England?
Yeah, England. They say they want to send people like you who arrive in England...
Yeah, it's going to the Rwanda.
To Rwanda,
Why
in Africa.
Going?
Well, they say they want to send you there because you're not welcome in England.
I don't know.
You've not heard about that?
Yeah, I don't know.
But it wouldn't put you off. It wouldn't deter you. You still want to go anyway.
Is you say going to the Rwanda?
Yeah.
I said no going. Okay, no problem. Go back to the France. Yeah.
And you're not worried about the waves, about the channel, about the sea, the danger of dying on the boat?
No, not danger.
So you've heard it there, directly. You can hear the words that we've already heard from our smuggler, ringing in your ears, ringing in his ears. No, it's not dangerous. No, there's not many people in the boats. Yeah, you got a life jacket, it'll be fine. The British will look after you, the French will look after you. They're very effective salesmen, as we've said. And their patter works. And more than that, you can hear also something that too few people who talk about this issue in Britain, including politicians, understand about the psychology of these people. First of all, they think it's deeply inhospitable in France, that it's unsafe here, and it kind of is unsafe here in the jungle in all sorts of ways, and the French don't treat them well at all. But also, this idea that if you make it a little bit more unpleasant in Britain, that they're not going to come, or even with Rwanda and all that stuff. Their journeys have been so long, that guy was 18 months, so long, often so tortuous. The idea of the danger of the English Channel or what might await them in terms of unpleasantness on the other side, they've already had such long, difficult journeys. That to them is just a literal and metaphorical drop in the ocean. They've been through worse. Right, as I said, that is from one of our Newsagents Investigates episode. If you want to listen to the full episode, if you missed it at the time, you can find it back in our archive from the 30th of September. We will have a brand new Newsagents Investigates episode landing with you on Sunday. We will return to the question of Rwanda right after this. Right, well, let's just talk a little bit about actually what is happening in Downing Street and Parliament today and all of the kind of manoeuvrings that are going on. We're joined by Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Natasha, first time in the Newsagents bunker. Come down from downstairs. Well, it's our pleasure. Well, while the grown-ups are away, it's always good to need some company in here, don't we? I mean, look, obviously, by the time people listen to this, it may well be that they're listening to it when the result is known. But it's still worth talking about how we got here. What's your sense of how Downing Street are feeling about the fact that this has become such a crunch vote, and how Conservative MPs are feeling as well?
I think if you look at Rishi Sunak in the chamber this afternoon, he looks pretty relaxed to me. I think that Downing Street are confident that they are going to win at least this vote on the second reading today. Now, talking to Tory MPs, they haven't made up their mind yet. And I think Downing Street are taking some comfort from the fact that Tory MPs do not have any specific asks this afternoon. They're not saying we're going to put down an amendment and this is what it should look like and this is what we want the Prime Minister to do. Now, we've had that breakfast in Downing Street where Tory MPs came in to talk to Rishi Sunak. He tried to woo them over. It doesn't sound like many of them were very convinced. He did say that he was open to tightening the bill. Now, what does that mean? Nobody seems to know. It's all so vague that I just don't think that the rebels, A, have the balls to vote this down in the way that some people were fearing it to, but they just do not have a collective idea about what they want to see. And so they are not coalescing around any particular strategy this afternoon. So that's why I think Downing Street are a little bit more confident that this is going to go through as planned. But like you say, it will kick back a fight for the new year.
Yeah, I mean, it's two things about that, isn't there? Is that one, and we've been talking about kind of how so much of this is so reminiscent of those Brexit divides and Brexit battle. Again, it's a bit like that. It's another echo, isn't it? In the sense that very often during those debates, the right of the Tory party often wasn't entirely clear what it wanted, but it was very clear what it didn't want. And that is basically, I mean, Sunak once again is Theresa May going like, what do you want here? What do you actually want? What do you actually want us to do? And so often there is not particularly an answer.
Exactly. And I think, you know, we only have to look back to Brexit to see how divided the Conservative Party has come. But they've always been a divided party. Yeah. They've always been a really broad church. We've had, you know, the Tory Wets have always been a thing, and the Tory right has always been a thing.
Even though they did kick out half the Wets.
Exactly.
They still managed to be divided.
Yeah, but also just linking back to 2019 election, which was, you know, in essence a post-Brexit election. legislation, you had MPs coming from very different backgrounds that thought very different things, traditionally not the people that you and I may think of Conservatives, and they are very different. They do think very differently. But yes, I don't think they really know exactly what they want. And in order to try and amend this legislation when it does come back for committee stage and for third reading, they are going to have to coalesce and they're going to have to organise and essentially decide how do they want to change it and what do they want, whether that is an amendment on the ECHR or whether that's something else. Because Downing Street have been very clear they can't go any further. But if they are open to tightening up, what does that tightening up look like?
But they do, assuming they survive today, that means that they do have time. They do have time to decide what they want to do, right? So if this comes back in January, this is, Sunak survives this week and he gets through to the next year and his authority is still intact. But at some point, presumably there will be a bigger crunch vote than today might perhaps prove on some amendment that perhaps the rebels managed to coalesce behind.
Yeah, definitely. And you saw that just a week ago with the infected blood vote, that the Conservative rebels successfully managed to team up with Labour to defeat the government. This is the signs of a dying government because they are starting to lose those big votes. And if they continue to do so, it will come a point where Rishi Sunak cannot govern anymore. Now, we've not reached that point yet, we don't think, but there will become a point in the next few weeks, potentially months, where I think the Prime Minister will get stuck. Now, I imagine that's going to probably be on a piece of legislation. It may not be on this migration issue of legislation, but it will be somewhere down the line where he will just be unable to still bring all of these strands of the Conservative Party together and will have to start thinking about his political future.
Have you got any sense of what it will be for Rishi Sunak if he were to lose the vote, say tonight, or if it were to happen at some point in the future? I mean, he's chosen not to make it a confidence vote. I mean, to me, it feels like it may well not be tonight will be the crunch moment, but if there is some amendment and he loses it or it becomes clear committee stage or whatever it is, that there probably will be some moment of reckoning. And if he loses it, what happens then? Because although he says it's not a confidence vote, it's a de facto one, surely.
Of course it is. It's his flagship bit of legislation. And if he loses this vote, there will be people calling for him to go. He will also be facing the choice, do I call a general election, which at the moment it looks like I'm probably going to lose. There are two schools of thought, essentially, that this migration issue brings forward an election, makes it more likely, because if Rishi Sunak gets stuck between now and May, will he choose to go early and think, why not? I've got nothing to lose and I probably won't gain too much more in the polls by waiting a few more months. Another school of thought is, will Rishi Sunak decide, rather than face the choice of calling an election he knows he's going to lose, would he stand aside in that instance and let someone else have a go? Then we're looking at a long election, because that person is going to want to bed in and give themselves the chance to do what Rishi Sunak has been unable to do.
Natasha, to me, surely the only point of Sunak going would be to replace him with a figure from the right. Because what's the point in replacing him with someone else from, say, the One Nation group of the party or whoever, who is basically going to kind of prosecute the same thing? It was the same echo, right, of when May went with Johnson. There wasn't really much point replacing her with a kind of, Rory Stewart or Jeremy Hunt or whoever it happened to be, because they were basically saying, well, I'm just going to try and get May's deal through. It had to be someone who was basically going to rip it up and start again. If Sunak were to go, in the new year or whatever, partly over the basis of this, it would have to be someone who surely was offering a very different prospectus. Otherwise, what's the point?
Definitely. And if you look at the people that are being spoken about right now, well, it was James Cleverly a few weeks ago, but now he seems to have lost the support of the Tory right over Rwanda.
It's not been a great few weeks for him, God love him, has it?
It's really not been a
not
great
his fault
few weeks.
Especially, but it's not been a great few weeks.
It's really not. Kemi Badenoch certainly sounds like she's on manoeuvres. I reckon she could probably be the person to coalesce around the right. But, she's also been in the cabinet as well, being a key part of Rishi Sunak's government. Penny Mordaunt, another name that crops up, but there is no unifying name at all. And this is exactly where we were with Brexit, when the people in the party were saying, well, go on, if you're hard enough, go on, call a leadership challenge. And we're not there yet. But if they do decide to go down that route, they do not have a candidate that is ready to go. All of this talk about bringing back Boris or Nigel Farage or even David Cameron, it's just mad, and it's just not going to happen.
Well, of course, you missed out one name, one crucial name, man of the moment. What about Robert Jenrick?
Robert Jenrick?
Robert Jenrick.
No.
Are we not? Are we missing out? Poor old Bob.
I don't think that actually.
But it's amazing the fact that that's even been on the cards, right? It's like, I have to say, my 2023 bingo, I never make too many predictions with all this stuff, right? But I did not think that Robert Jenrick becoming the kind of voice of the right, being on manoeuvres, look at all he tweeted about the weekend about Israel criticising the government for abstaining at the UN. He's got a haircut, lost some weight, he's running, right?
I don't think so. I think
but they all see through it, right?
I think he would get back on a Suella ticket, I think, if he were going to run. But again, I don't think that Suella has that support within the Conservative Party that she maybe thinks that she does. And we saw this, obviously, when Suella did run to be Tory leader herself. I don't think that she's got enough support in order to try and push a leadership challenge. Robert Jenrick, that would be the ultimate betrayal for Rishi Sunak, wouldn't it? Someone that he's called a friend, that worked on his own leadership campaign, resigning and then running against him to be the Tory leader. I don't think that's even something that Robert Jenrick would do.
But, finally, there is got to be some frustration in Downing Street. They've done it to themselves. But actually, whisper it, and it's not much to comment on, but there is a little bit of evidence that there's been a small, modest bit of Conservative revival in the polls. They've sort of narrowed it down by a couple of points. Labour but the difference between kind of like 20 points or 18 points and sort of 15 points or 14 points, even 12 points, is actually quite, a 12-point lead, you could say, that's maybe like recoverable. We could narrow that in a campaign. 20 points, not. And yet here we are basically talking about something actually about which they are fundamentally very politically weak now. Instead of, say, talking about the fact that inflation is down, interest rates may well start to come down at some point in the new year or in the middle of next year. There is a kind of, it's a very narrow path, but there could be a path for Sunak if he were basically talking about something else. But he has chosen to talk about this.
I think for Downing Street, the strategy was that, to claw a point or two back in the polls every month or two between then and the election, and that he's got a fighting chance of potentially holding on to power. But that got stuck. It got stuck in Boris Johnson, it got stuck in Partygate around sort of March, April, June this year, and it hasn't moved. There's nothing that the government at the moment are doing that's moving the polls in any way. And I think it's now got to a point where people believe that the Conservatives are going to lose the next election. So it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because they just think, well, actually, why would we vote for these people? Because they're going to lose. And you saw it in 1997 with people voting for Tony Blair because they thought that he was going to win. And I think we will start now to see. And I just don't think there's anything really that's moving the dial. You saw Sunak's sort of green shift. You saw his conference speech. You've seen this migration shift. None of these have moved the dial. And there will be people in Downing Street worrying, well, is there anything, even tax cuts in the budget, that didn't move the dial at all. Is there anything that Downing Street can do to change their fortunes?
But they haven't talked about it. Like, if they talked about it, if they'd reminded people, if they weren't shifting message every 10 seconds, and actually the only message they don't ever give up on is this stop the boats thing, which literally palpably is not working and probably cannot work before the next election, are they then surprised that they don't have a recovery in the polls? Because they could have chosen to spend the last month talking about the tax cuts, which are sort of a little bit dodgy depending how you look at it, but they are, there has been a tax cut that they've delivered, but they haven't mentioned it since Budget Day or since Autumn Statement Day.
Exactly. We had 2 weeks of talking about it, and then it suddenly got absorbed with Rwanda because of the Supreme Court ruling. That was out of their hands. But I think in the new year, we will see that come back. We will see Downing Street come in, new year, new narrative. We'll start to come back with that. They always have a relaunch. Always have a relaunch. Whether it will work or not, I'm very sceptical about. But yes, I'm sure they will come back, because that tax cut, let's not forget, comes in January. They will all be wanting to remind us that it will be coming in January. So I'm sure that narrative will come back.
Well, unless there's this deferred vote, which will be in early January, presumably, so blows it up again. Anyway, have you enjoyed coming down, your foray into the newsagent's bunker?
It's been lovely. Please have me again.
Well, you come back. The water's warm.
Good.
Natasha, thanks so much. Right, that is it from all of us today. We'll talk about the fallout from the Commons on tomorrow's show. John and Emily unfortunately couldn't be here today. Off for tea at Buckingham Palace, marmalade sandwiches and wine gums in hand. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.